First contact report. The insane humanoids encounter. There I was, minding my own business in the most boring corner of the galaxy, when I accidentally discovered that humans are absolutely, certifiably insane. And I mean that in the most terrifying way possible. My name is Xyler. Yeah, I know. Sounds like someone crushing a bag of crisps, but that's what you get when your species evolved from silicon-based entities living in a vacuum, communicating through electromagnetic waves. I'm what you might call a xenobiologist, though that's putting it generously. Really, I'm more like a cosmic tourist with a PAAHDAADDDDHEHE, wandering around the galaxy, cataloging weird alien behaviors, and trying not to get eaten. The Galactic Scientific Consortium pays me decent credits to document emerging sentient species behavioral patterns, which is academic speak for, go poke strange aliens with a stick, and see what happens. It's not glamorous work, but it beats my previous job as a mineral taste tester on the sulfur mines of Bracton 7. Humans, according to my briefing files, were supposed to be a nice, safe assignment. Recently contacted species, technologically primitive, probably spent most of their time hitting things with rocks and making crude art on cave walls. The kind of civilization you could study from orbit while sipping fermented algae extract and working on your thesis about the philosophical implications of tool use among carbon-based bipeds. Boy, was I wrong. The first sign that something was deeply, fundamentally off about these creatures came when I tried to make contact. Standard procedure: land your observation pod in a remote area, deploy universal translators, approach the nearest settlement with hands visible and empty, and announce peaceful intentions while broadcasting mathematical proofs to demonstrate intelligence. I followed the protocol to the letter, found a nice isolated spot near what appeared to be a small human settlement. Maybe 30 structures, primitive, but organized. The buildings were constructed from processed organic matter and mineral composites, which suggested they'd at least figured out basic engineering. Promise. I activated my environmental suit. Humans breathe a fairly standard oxygen-nitrogen mix, but you can never be too careful. And began my approach just after local sunrise. The universal translator hummed to life, analyzing electromagnetic ambient communications and building a linguistic database. That's when I heard it. Contact. 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 Unknown entity approaching from the southeast. Approximately 200 meters out. Repeat. We have an unknown entity. I froze. The voice was coming through my translator, which meant the humans were using some form of organized communication system, but the tone was all wrong. Where I expected curiosity or fear, I heard something that made my crystalline structure vibrate with ease. Professional competence. Roger that. Base. Visual confirmation on the entity. Bipedal, roughly humanoid. Wearing what appears to be environmental gear. Preliminary assessment. Potential first contact scenario. First contact scenario? These creatures had protocols for first contact. Suddenly, my nice, safe assignment was looking significantly less safe. Copy. All units, maintain distance, but keep visual contact. Someone get Commander Valerius on the horn and wake up the linguist. Looks like we might actually get to use all that training. Training? They had training for this. I was supposed to be studying primitive tool users, and instead I'd stumbled into what sounded like a military operation run by beings who'd somehow developed first contact protocols before developing faster than light travel. This was not in the briefing files. I decided to proceed anyway. Maybe I'd misunderstood something. Maybe Commander Valerius was just what they called their tribal leader, and all this talk of units and training was just how humans organize their hunting parties. I raised my primary manipulator appendages in what I hoped was a universal gesture of peaceful intent and activated my greeting protocol. The translator began broadcasting a basic mathematical sequence, prime numbers, followed by simple geometric concepts, then a harmonic pattern indicating sentience. The response was immediate. Base. The entity is transmitting. Looks like some kind of mathematical progression. Pretty sophisticated stuff. Whoever this is, they're definitely intelligent. Roger. Dr. Anya. Are you getting this? A new voice joined the communication channel, slightly rougher, with what my linguistic subroutines tagged as indicators of advanced age and extensive experience. Yeah, I'm seeing it. Classic first contact protocol. They're demonstrating mathematical knowledge to establish intelligence. Very textbook. Whoever these guys are, they've done this before. They've done this before. The word sent another harmonic shiver through my structure. These thought humans I was part of some larger organization that regularly made first contact with primitive species, which meant they understood the concept of galactic civilization, space travel, and interstellar communication well enough to recognize standard protocols. But according to my files, they'd only been contacted 6 months ago. How did they already know about first contact protocols? Dr. Anya, what's your assessment? Well, Commander, they're following standard galactic consortium procedures almost exactly. Either they're part of the consortium themselves, or they've had enough contact with consortium species to learn the protocols, which is interesting. My environmental suit's emergency beacon started pulsing. Not because of any immediate danger, but because my stress levels had just spiked into the red zone. These humans knew about the galactic consortium. They knew the protocols, and they were talking about it like it was completely normal. Alright, people, let's do this by the book. Dr. Anya, your primary contact. Security teams maintain overwatch, but keep it friendly, and someone records everything. Xenobiology is going to want a full debrief. Xenobiology. They had xenobiology departments. A single human emerged from the settlement, walking with the confident stride of someone who'd done this many times before. Male, according to my scanner, middle-aged by human standards, wearing what appears to be a uniform of some kind. He approached within 10 meters and stopped, raising his own appendages in a mirror of my peaceful gesture. Greetings, traveler, he said, his words coming through my translator with remarkable clarity. I'm Dr. Anya Petrova, xenobiological specialist with Earth Defense Command. Welcome to Earth. Earth Defense Command? They had a defense command named after their planet, which implied they had other commands. Probably an entire military structure designed around defending their world from exactly the kind of contact I was attempting to make. Greetings, I managed, my vocal synthesizer, struggling with the concept. I am Xyler, the Galactic Scientific Consortium. I was under the impression that your species was recently contacted. Dr. Anya smiled, and something about that expression made me deeply uncomfortable. Oh, we were. About 6 months ago. Like you said. Fascinating experience. Really opened our eyes to what's out there. She paused, still smiling, that unsettling smile. Tell me, Xyler, how many other species has the consortium contacted in the last standard year? The question hit me like a plasma bolt. That information is... Why do you ask? Just curious. See, we've been doing some math since first contact, and the numbers are interesting. The consortium has been around for, what, 12,000 years? Contacted maybe 4,000 species in that time. That's about one new species every 3 years on average. My crystalline structure was vibrating at frequencies that would have been audible to most species. That sounds approximately correct. So, imagine our surprise when, in the 6 months since we were contacted, 17 different consortium delegations have visited our little corner of space. That's a contact rate increase of about, let's call it 5,000%. I tried to process this information. 17 different species in 6 months? That was completely outside normal protocol. First contact was supposed to be a gradual process, carefully managed to prevent cultural shock. You didn't just open the floodgates and let random xenobiologists wander through like tourists at a zoo. Now, Dr. Anya continued, her tone conversational, but somehow threatening. We asked around, talked to some of those visitors. Turns out most of them had files on us that were quite seriously outdated. Files that suggested we were primitive, probably still living in caves. Definitely not a threat to anyone. No, Dr. Anya. I can assure you that the consortium's intentions are purely scientific. I'm sure they are. The thing is, we humans have a saying, Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And lately, we've been feeling like maybe someone's been trying to fool us. The Commander Valerius's voice cracked through the communication channel. Dr. Anya, we've got movement on the perimeter sensors. 3 more ships just dropped out of TTL. Enya's smile never wavered. Well, now, that's interesting timing. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you, Xyler? I absolutely did know something about that. Those would be other consortium researchers, probably with the same outdated files, coming to study the primitive humans. This was about to become a very complicated situation. Dr. Anya, I think there may have been some miscommunication regarding your species status. Miscommunication, right? She touched something on her uniform, and her voice suddenly carried to the entire settlement. Attention, all personnel. We have multiple inbound contacts. Defensive positions, but keep it friendly unless they prove otherwise. And then, I watched with growing horror as this supposedly primitive human settlement transformed itself into a military installation in under 30 seconds. Concealed weapon emplacements rose from the ground. Camouflaged structures revealed themselves to be defensive positions. What I'd taken for simple dwellings were apparently barracks, because humans in military gear were emerging from them in perfect formation. But the real terror came when I looked up. The sky was full of ships. Human ships. Sleek and deadly looking. Dropping out of whatever TTL system they developed and taking defensive positions around their planet. Not just a few ships, dozens of them, may hundreds. Jesus Christ, someone asserted over the comm channel. Look at them all. Commander Valerius, to all units, came a new voice, crisp with authority. We have confirmation of multiple consortium vessels in system. Unknown intentions, but given recent patterns, we're treating this as a potential reconnaissance in force. Reconnaissance in force? These humans thought they were being scouted for some kind of invasion, which, to be fair, they kind of were. Dr. Anya, I said carefully, I believe there's been a serious misunderstanding. Oh, I'm sure there has, she replied. The question is, are you part of it, or another victim of it? Before I could answer, the air around us shimmered, and 3 more consortium researchers materialized. Standard transport protocols. Nothing threatening about it, just efficient. But the humans reacted like they'd just been attacked. Weapons appeared in their hands like magic. Not primitive kinetic weapons either, but energy-based systems that looked remarkably sophisticated for a species that was supposedly hitting rocks together 6 months ago. Easy, Dr. Anya called out. Standard transport beams. No immediate threat, but everyone stays sharp. My fellow researchers looked around in confusion. They'd expected a primitive settlement, and maybe one native to study. Instead, they materialized into what was obviously a military compound, surrounded by beings who clearly understood advanced technology and viewed them as potential threats. Xyler, one of them said. Lilith, a fellow xenobiologist who specialized in behavioral patterns. What exactly is the situation here? The situation, I said slowly, is that our briefing files were approximately 6 months out of date and catastrophically inaccurate. Dr. Anya stepped forward, still maintaining that unsettling smile. Gentlemen, welcome to Earth. I'm Dr. Anya, and I'll be your guide to what we humans like to call the consequences of your own actions. Lilith made a sound that translates roughly as confused terror. Consequences? What consequences? We're here for scientific observation, right? Scientific observation of a primitive species that you've been studying without their knowledge or consent. Enya's tone was still conversational, but something had changed in her posture. Tell me, how many times have consortium species done this? Just dropped in on primitive civilizations to poke around and take notes. It's standard protocol, I found myself saying. We document emerging species, catalog their development, ensuring they're not a threat to galactic stability. Ensuring they're not a threat, Anya repeated, by studying them without their knowledge, by maintaining files on their capabilities and weaknesses, by sending multiple research teams to catalog their defenses and military capabilities. The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, because when she put it like that, it sounded, well, It sounded exactly like what we were doing. Commander Valerius, Anya spoke into her communicator. I think we need to have a conversation with the broader consortium leadership. Copy that, Doc. Admiral Sato is standing by on the secure channel. Admiral Sato? These humans had admirals and secure communication channels that could apparently reach wherever Admiral Sato was stationed. Xyler, Anya said, turning back to us. You and your colleagues are welcome to observe our society. In fact, we insist on it, but you're going to do it as invited guests, not as, what's the phrase you used? Scientific observers. One of the other researchers, a crystalline entity from the hegemony of rational thought, made a sound like grinding glass. This is highly irregular. The consortium has protocols. The consortium, Anya interrupted, has been treating every newly contacted species like a potential threat to be catalogued and contained. Well, congratulations. You found one. That's when the real scope of the situation hit me. The ships filling the sky weren't just local defense forces. They were too varied, too numerous, too sophisticated. These were the ships of a species that had taken the sudden influx of alien visitors and reverse-engineered everything they could get their manipulator appendages on. Dr. Anya said carefully, how many ships do you have? Her smile expanded. That's classified. But I can tell you that 6 months ago we had 0 TTL-capable vessels. Today, we have what our military analysis describes as a sufficient deterrent force. A sufficient deterrent force in 6 months, starting from 0. That's impossible, Lilith stammered. Faster than light travel requires decades of theoretical development, centuries of material science advancement, massive industrial infrastructure. You're absolutely right, Anya agreed cheerfully. Good thing we had 17 different examples to study. Amazing how much you can learn when your entire species is suddenly motivated by the possibility of alien invasion. The communication channel cracked to life again. Dr. Anya, Admiral Sato, has reviewed the situation. She wants to extend an invitation to our guests. An invitation? I asked, trying not to let my stress harmonics leak into my voice. That's right. You wanted to study human society? Well, we'd like to show you what we've built. All of it. Full access. Complete transparency. We think you'll find it educational. Something in her tone made every survival instinct I had start screaming warnings. But we were hardly in a position to refuse. We were outnumbered, outgunned, and standing in the middle of what was apparently a military installation run by a species that had gone from stone knives to starships in half a year. That's very generous, I managed. Oh, we're a generous species, Anya said. Sometimes to a fault, but we're also practical. And right now, it's practical for us to make sure the Galactic Consortium understands exactly what kind of neighbors they've gained. The transport beam activated around us. And suddenly, we were standing in what was obviously a starship. Not a human starship. The design was clearly based on consortium technology, but it had been modified in ways that made my crystalline structure ache just looking at them. Where consortium ships were built for efficiency and long-term reliability, this vessel had been optimized for something else entirely. Every surface was armored. Every corridor had defensive positions. Every system had multiple redundancies and what looked like improvised weaponry integrated into the basic infrastructure. Welcome aboard the ADSV Determination, Anya said, gesturing around the modified interior. She started life as a consortium science vessel. One of the first to visit us, actually. Wonderful technology, very sophisticated. We learned a lot from her. Started life? One of my colleagues whispered. Oh, yes. Completely gutted and rebuilt, of course. Turns out, consortium ships are built with a lot of interesting assumptions about their operational environment. For instance, they're not really designed to operate in hostile territory. We were led through corridors that hummed with barely contained energy. Human crew members moved with the efficient precision of a military unit. But there was something else in their movements. Something that took me a while to identify. They were enjoying themselves. These humans were having fun turning a peaceful exploration vessel into an instrument of war. They approached the challenge like it was some kind of elaborate game, and they were winning. The really interesting part, Anya continued, as we walked, was the cultural exchange. See, 17 different consortium species meant 17 different technology bases, 17 different approaches to the same basic problems. It was like having a masterclass in galactic engineering. We entered what had once been the ship's main laboratory. Now, it was something between a workshop and a war room, filled with displays showing ship positions, resource allocations, and what looked like strategic charts. For instance, Anya gestured to a display showing ship schematics. The hegemony builds for durability and efficiency. The Zepyrian collective focuses on speed and maneuverability. The crystalline orthodox, no offense, Xyler, prioritizes information gathering and analysis. All different approaches, all with their own strengths. The display shifted, showing a new schematic. It was clearly derived from consortium designs, but integrated in ways I'd never seen before. Now, what do you think happens when you take the best features of 17 different technological traditions and combine them with a species that's been preparing for interstellar conflict since the day they learned it was possible? I stared at the schematic, trying to process what I was seeing. It wasn't just a hybrid design. It was something entirely new. Something that took the best of consortium technology and weaponized it in ways the original designers had never considered. This is a warship, I said, the words barely above a whisper. This is a human ship, Anya corrected. We don't really distinguish between the two anymore. Admiral Sato chose that moment to make her entrance, and I immediately understood why the humans had put her in charge of their military operations. She moved with the kind of casual confidence that suggested she could personally dismantle most of the consortium fleet with nothing but harsh language and superior tactics. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that makes entire star systems pay attention. "Welcome to the Sol Defense Fleet, Admiral," I managed, trying to maintain some semblance of diplomatic protocol. "We're xenobiologists with the Galactic Scientific Consortium. Our mission is purely analytical." "Your mission," she interrupted gently, "was to assess the military capabilities and potential threat level of a newly contacted species. Standard procedure, according to the files we've recovered from previous visits." Recovered from previous visits. The implication was clear. Now, normally, we take exception to being studied like laboratory specimens, but as Dr. Anya mentioned, we're a practical species, and it occurred to us that maybe, instead of being offended, we should be grateful. She gestured to the strategic displays around us. After all, without the consortium's interest in our capabilities, we never would have had the motivation to develop them this quickly. The displays shifted, showing what looked like a real-time tactical overview of the local stellar region. There were a lot of ships out there. A lot of human ships. 6 months ago, we were a single-planet species with barely functional chemical rockets. Today, we have defensive installations in 17 systems, alliance agreements with 12 independent species, and what our analysts believe to be the most advanced fleet in this galactic region. 12 independent species? Alliance agreements? These humans hadn't just been building ships. They'd been building a coalition. Lilith, the fellow xenobiologist, spoke up, his harmonic echoing his terror. "Surely you understand that the consortium's interest was purely scientific. There was no hostile intent." "Of course not," Sato agreed. "The consortium isn't hostile. You're just thorough. Very thorough. 17 different research teams, all cataloging our weaknesses, all reporting back to a central authority that maintains detailed files on thousands of species across the galaxy." She paused, letting that sink in. "Tell me, what happens to species that the consortium determines to be a potential threat?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Anya stepped forward. "We did some research of our own, you see. Turns out, the galaxy is full of former civilizations that had unfortunate encounters with more advanced species. Always different circumstances, always plausible explanations, but the pattern is consistent. Species gets contacted by the consortium. Multiple research teams visit over the following months. Detailed assessments are made of military capabilities, resource availability, strategic value, and then the species is determined to be a potential future threat. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The consortium doesn't conquer, Sato said quietly. That would be crude, obviously. Instead, they influence. Economic pressure, political manipulation, sometimes strategic resource shortages. Always deniable, always apparently natural, but the end result is the same. I wanted to protest, to insist that the consortium was a peaceful organization dedicated to scientific advancement and galactic stability. But the words wouldn't come, because when you looked at the pattern they were describing, when you considered the systematic nature of our scientific observations. However, Sato continued, her tone becoming almost conversational, we've discovered something interesting about this pattern. It only works on species that don't know what's happening. The tactical display shifted again, now showing what appeared to be communication networks spanning dozens of star systems. Turns out when you warn other species about the pattern, they tend to take precautions. And when multiple species start taking precautions together, new contacts appear on the display. Ship signatures I didn't recognize from species that weren't in any consortium database. You build alliances, I whimpered. We build alliances, Sato confirmed, based on mutual defense, shared technology, and a common understanding that maybe, just maybe, a 12,000-year-old galactic hegemony isn't necessarily acting in everyone's best interests. Anya activated a communication panel. Xyler, your colleagues in the consortium are probably wondering why 17 research teams have missed their scheduled check-ins. I imagine there's some concern about our little corner of space. Actually, there was probably full-scale panic by now. 17 missing research teams would trigger every emergency protocol the consortium had. Dr. Anya, I said carefully. What exactly are you reacting to? We're reacting, Admiral Sato said, stepping forward. A new kind of relationship. One based on mutual respect, transparent communication, and the understanding that Earth and her allies are not subjects to be studied. The displays around us shifted to show something that made my crystalline structure resonate with shock. It was a star chart, but not like any I'd seen before. This one showed the location of every consortium world, every fleet position, every strategic resource. We're responding, she continued, so that the consortium recognizes that the galaxy has changed, that there are now players on the board who won't be cataloged, assessed, and managed like every other species you've encountered. And if the consortium refused? Lilith asked, his voice barely above a harmonic whisper. Sato smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression I'd ever seen on any species anywhere in the galaxy. Then they'll learn the same lesson that 17 research teams have learned over the past 6 months, which is, I had to ask, humans don't like being studied without their consent. The communication panel chimed, and a new voice filled the chamber. It was spoken in perfect consortium standard, with the crisp diction of high command. Consortium Central Authority. This is Admiral Sato of the Sol Defense Fleet. We're transmitting coordinates for a diplomatic meeting to be held in neutral space. We have some things to discuss. There was a long pause before the response came. Sol Defense Fleet, this is Consortium Command. We were not aware that your species had developed faster than light communication capabilities. We've developed a lot of things, Sato replied pleasantly. That's what we'd like to discuss, along with the status of 17 research teams that seem to have extended their missions indefinitely. Another pause, longer this time. Admiral Sato, we would be interested in opening diplomatic dialogue with your species. Excellent. We'll be bringing representatives from our various alliance partners as well. Should make for an interesting conversation. Alliance partners? Sato's smile expanded. Did I not mention? Turns out, when you spread the word about systematic intelligence gathering operations, a lot of species develop a sudden interest in mutual defense agreements. The communication ended, leaving us standing in the kind of silence that usually precedes either major breakthroughs or complete disasters. "So," Anya said, turning to us, "would you still like to study human culture?" I looked around at the modified starship, the strategic displays, the casual competence of a species that had gone from primitive to peer competitor in 6 months. At the Alliance networks, the defensive installations, the systematic dismantling of a 12,000-year-old galactic order. "I think," I said slowly, "I've learned everything I need to know." Anya laughed, the kind of sound that suggested she was truly enjoying the situation. "Oh, but you haven't seen the best part yet." She activated another display, this one showing what appeared to be construction projects scattered across dozens of systems. Massive installations, clearly based on consortium technology, but modified with that same unsettling human efficiency. "See, the thing about humans is, we're really good at learning from our mistakes. And our biggest mistake was assuming that just because someone seems friendly, they don't represent a threat." The construction projects were weapons platforms, dozens of them positioned throughout the local stellar region, with clear fields of fire covering all major shipping lanes. "We won't make that mistake again," Sato added, "with anyone." And that's when it hit me. The real terror of what we'd accomplished here. We'd contacted a species that was primitive, manageable, safely contained within their own system. What we'd created was something else entirely. We'd created a species that understood galactic politics, possessed advanced technology, commanded alliance networks, and had absolutely no trust in the existing order. A species that looked at the consortium's 12,000 years of careful management and saw it for exactly what it was, a protection racket on a galactic scale. "Admiral," I said, my vocal synthesizer struggling with concepts I'd never had to express before. "What happens now?" Sato considered the question for a moment. Now, we find out whether the consortium is interested in genuine partnership with independent species, or whether they prefer the old system, where they were the only ones with all the ships. She gestured to the tactical displays, where human vessels continued their patrol patterns around installations that shouldn't have existed. "Either way," she added, "it should be interesting." 3 hours later, I was back in my observation pod, filing what was probably the most unusual first contact report in consortium history. How do you explain to a galactic civilization that they've accidentally created their own worst nightmare? How do you tell beings who've spent millennia managing other species that they've just encountered one that can't be managed? The answer is, very carefully. But as I transmitted my final report, I found myself oddly hopeful. Maybe the consortium would adapt, would recognize that the galaxy had changed and change with it. Maybe the alliance networks Earth was building would lead to genuine cooperation between species, instead of the careful manipulation that had defined galactic politics for so long. Or maybe we were about to witness the first interstellar war in recorded history. Either way, it was going to be educational. Xyler, xenobiologist, Galactic Scientific Consortium, final report. Human Cultural Assessment Classification. Everything has gone wrong. Send help. Addendum recommends immediate diplomatic contact with Earth leadership. Also recommends updating threat assessment protocols to account for species that can reverse engineer an entire galactic civilization in under 6 months. Also recommends hazard pay. Lots of hazard pay. Report epilogue. 6 months later, the consortium did adapt, eventually. Turned out that when faced with the choice between promoting the independence of dozens of species or fighting a war against an alliance that knew all their technological secrets, even 12,000-year-old galactic civilizations could learn new tricks. The Treaty of Sol established what historians would later call the New Galactic Compact, a framework for interstellar relations based on consent, transparency, and mutual benefits, rather than systematic management by a single hegemonic power. Dr. Anya Petrova was promoted to head of the newly formed Department of Interstellar Relations. Admiral Sato became the first human to serve on the Galactic Security Council, and Earth became the unofficial capital of what was rapidly becoming a very different kind of galaxy. As for me, Well, I got my hazard pay and a new assignment studying the long-term effects of rapid technological development on interstellar political structures. It turns out that when humans set their minds to something, they don't just solve the problem, they solve every related problem they can think of, and then invent new problems to solve just to stay busy. The galaxy, I discovered, was about to become a much more interesting place, and humans, as it turned out, were absolutely terrifying, but in the best possible way.